Well, hello there and welcome to Old Classic Car. Now, just as a bit of a different type of video for today, I've been going through old print photographs, the old 35mm print photos in old albums, dusty albums, sat upstairs in my office, and I came across two snapshots that we took in the late 1980s of a wonderful garage find British classic, one of these. The Mark 1 Austin Mini. This particular car dates to 1964 and it had been sat in this garage for many a year, and I thought, well, there's a bit of a tale to tell around this particular Mini that we spotted all those years ago, so I thought, what a great subject for a video. Now it's just started to rain, so I think we need to dash back inside, go and get these photographs and have a bit of a chat and just tell the story of how we came to find and stumble across this Mark 1 Mini. And at the end of this video I will include a plea for your help to find out a little bit more about the current whereabouts of this wonderful little old Mini. The car we found, and the subject of this video, is an Austin Mini Mark 1 base spec saloon, all 848cc of it, registered in 1964 as CDM 316B. A Flintshire, North Wales, area registration number, first introduced in 1962. Finished in all over white, albeit somewhat faded by the late 1980s, it had clearly been sitting in a concrete sectional garage in Wales, fortunately a dry concrete sectional garage, for many years. The gent who owned it ran a commercial garage and filling station, and alongside this rural establishment sat a somewhat later single domestic garage. I think it's fair to say that he was a little cagey over talking about and eventually letting us view and photograph this Mark 1 Mini, a car that had belonged to his late mother, if I remember correctly. Maybe she'd even bought it new, I'm not sure, I don't remember now, but this was 35 years ago. I think the reason that the Mini's owner finally opened up and told me about his car was the fact that at the time I was running our family-owned from new Austin A40 Mark 1, built in 1960, as my daily driver, and I regularly topped up with fuel at his garage whenever we, as a family, were holidaying in the same village. He must have thought that I was cut from the right cloth, driving an ageing product of the BMC empire, rather than a modern Ford Fiesta, Nissan Micra or Vauxhall Nova, that kind of thing. We built up a fragile rapport over time, but it was some time before news of this intriguing garage find Mini crept into our conversations. Piqued by interest, partly because it was an old car, therefore immediately intriguing, and partly because I learnt to drive on Mum's Mark 1 Mini estate before the A40 came onto the scene, I often brought up the subject of the old Mini, in a bid to at least win a look at this long-parked gem, or at least what I hoped would be a gem. As mentioned, this village was a destination we often headed off to when caravanning with Mum and Dad, and we got to know the area quite well. In fact, myself behind the wheel of the aforementioned A40, and, a couple of years into my motoring journey, the Mark III Spitfire that I returned to the road after years of disintegrating merrily on the previous owner's driveway. If you'd like me to tell the story of that experience, please drop a note into the comments below this video. Anyway, back to the Mini. The area it resided in was largely rural, and despite the village only being quite small, it proved to be a rich hunting ground for me in my quest to hunt down, and ideally buy, interesting old vehicles. In 1989, I found my first classic pickup truck there, a 1955 Ford E83W pickup, and it was again due to owning and driving the A40 as my daily driver that I gained the trust of the Ford's owner, to the extent that he agreed to sell it to me, rather than to many of the locals that had also been keen to rescue the very corroding field find Ford. Driving an old car on a regular basis can certainly open doors, as we'll see literally in a moment. In the end, I own that little truck in varying states of repair 3 times, and it's now in the custody of an acquaintance of mine and is barn stored barely a couple of miles from where I am sat now. On one caravanning break in the same village, while my folks were back home for a couple of days, I forget why exactly, I popped out in the A40 to buy a loaf of bread from the local post office cum village shop, and it hadn't escaped my notice that down the side of said establishment resided a somewhat faded and decidedly non-operative Volvo 121, a 4-door version of the famous Amazon series. In the 1970s, my folks ran a pale blue 121 as the family steed, registered ENB622D. So this chance discovery of a similar car, YKA 750J, led to the inevitable conversation with the car's owner in the shop, and the Volvo joining my growing fleet of decrepit vehicles for the princely sum of £50 plus a loaf of bread. In fact, that was the first of 3 such Volvos I bought for that amount over the years in different places. So yes, this was an area rich in the type of time-worn vehicle that I've always been partial to, then as now. Anyway, back to Austin Minis. Apologies there for wandering off on a slight Ford and Volvo related tangent. The history of the BMC Mini, a compact 4-seater designed by legendary designer Alicus Igonis, will no doubt have been covered in great depth in many YouTube videos already, so there's no need for me to dwell too long on that, other than to remind viewers and listeners that the Mini was first put on sale in 1959, badged as either the Morris Mini Minor or the Austin 7, later the Austin Mini. The Mini would go on to be available as a pint-sized estate, van and pickup, not forgetting the myriad of performance-oriented coupers and such like, and special editions introduced from the 1970s onwards with great enthusiasm by British Leyland and later the Rover Group, before the eventual demise of the classic Mini. And who can forget the incredible Mini-based Wild Goose campers and myriad of sports cars, Mini Marcos GTM, etc., that utilised Mini running gear under their rakish bodies. CDM, the Mini in question, was, or perhaps still is, we'll get to that later, a Mark 1 Austin badged Mini in base specification. Not for this car the fripperies offered a standard fitment on the Mini Deluxe, no. This car was as basic as it got, and was probably the closest interpretation of what Igonis had in mind when first putting pencil to paper to design a cheap runaround capable of transporting 4 people plus belongings in relative comfort. A flick through a period brochure sat on my desk here is a good reminder of the differences between base and deluxe Minis. The base car, for instance, may do with rubber floor mats, carpets in the deluxe, just a single sun visor, the passenger had to do without unless a deluxe had been chosen, a painted body colour fuel filler cap and Lucas number plate light cover, chrome on the deluxe and indeed retrofitted I assume to the car featured here, and plain bumpers unadorned by overriders. The heater standard fit on the deluxe was offered as an extra cost option on the base version, and whether the first owner of CDM ticked that particular box on the option sheet when buying this example from their local BMC agent in 1964 isn't recorded. When news of this dormant Mini became known, I was exceedingly keen to cast a youthful eye over it and try to establish whether it might ever be for sale, although by this point it had become very obvious to me that the owner was very attached to the Mini, despite it not turning a wheel in many a year, and the likelihood of it ever becoming available to buy was, to put it mildly, extremely remote. After much gentle persuasion over several garage visits, I always made sure to top up with fuel at his emporium, the day dawned finally when me, my brother and I would get the opportunity to view the Mini for the first time. A certain amount of detritus had accumulated in front of the garage over time, perhaps as an added security measure. The garage was visible from the road, although the small side windows were not easily reached. With the approach cleared, the 2 metal doors were persuaded to open, their old hinges creaking in disgust at being awoken from their slumber. They refused to fully open, but they opened sufficiently to reveal a compact and curvaceous rump of a long quiet 1964 Mini, wedged in the garage behind an assortment of caravan spec Calor gas bottles, with various car parts of not always identifiable origin piled down one side. I can see a Cortina wheel and the grille from a Morris Minor in one of the photos. How long the Mini had been sat I don't know, several years at least. As barn find / garage find classic cars go, this was a beauty. Sat for years unmodified and as parked in a dry garage in a fairly remote village, finds don't get much better, and this little gem ticked all the boxes for me at the time. Well, almost all of the boxes, as the owner was still, understandably perhaps given its family backstory, reluctant to entertain actually letting it go. We squeezed gently down the side of the Mini to access the front end, and it was noted that some work had been undertaken on it, namely the replacement of both front wings with, I think, genuine BMC or BL panels still in their temporary black overcoat. Several more minutes were spent inspecting and ogling this untouched piece of history before the time came to close the garage doors once again and submit the Mini once more to the murky gloom of its long-term abode. In subsequent visits to the garage, I made further gentle inquiries about the Mini and the possibility of buying it. My exact recollection of how these negotiations unfolded is lost to the murky mists of time, but I do remember a modest purchase figure being mentioned by the owner, but at no point was a concrete offer of sale made to us, as I remember. So after some time, with hopes of securing the Mini's purchase fading and other projects now taking up my time, the idea of trying to buy the Mini receded in my mind, although never fully extinguished itself. By this point in time, I holidayed less frequently with the rest of the Jones clan, and opportunities to bend the ear of the Mini owner reduced and eventually ceased altogether. On occasion, when in the area, I would drive by the filling station and look at the garage in which we'd seen the Mini, pondering quietly as to whether it remained in there, surrounded by camping gas bottles. After a few years, added security provided by a mound of asphalt dumped in front of the garage doors was noted, which kind of suggested to me that the Mini was still in there. This would have been in the mid-1990s, I imagine. On a more recent trip to the area, I drove by again just to see what, if anything, had changed over the intervening years. The garage cum filling station had, by this time, been converted into living accommodation. I thought maybe by now it would have been swept away altogether in the name of progress, so-called. And the small concrete garage, home to the Mini for so long, had disappeared, along with, presumably, the pint-sized Mark I Mini that had sat inside it. So the question is really, what became of the Mark I Mini? Perhaps it ended up being scrapped. In a town a few miles away there was quite a large scrapyard, still is in fact, from which I rescued many a part when piecing my first Spitfire back together in the late 1980s. Steel hardtop for a Mark III Spitfire, £15 sir. Did the Mini end up in there, I wonder? I certainly hope not, as it's such a solid car and relatively easy project to get back on the road. A check of the DVLA website, where current vehicle registrations can be viewed, still shows record of CDM 316B intriguingly. It confirms that the Mini was collected and driven away by its beaming first owner in August of 1964, and that it was in use until, at the latest, 1984. Its road tax expired in October of that year and has been untaxed ever since. This leaves two possible scenarios on the table. One, it is sat in another garage somewhere awaiting a return to the highway, perhaps mid-restoration, or as we found it in the late 1980s, in super original condition apart from the replacement of both front wings. Or the second possibility is one that even all these years later leaves me with a feeling of despondency, and is probably, sadly, the more likely outcome. It may well be that it simply went for scrap and DVLA was never notified. Things were a lot laxer in those days, paperwork-wise, and many is the car still showing on the DVLA database that has long since been dispatched to the crusher. Perhaps whoever took on the main garage and filling station with a view to converting it into domestic quarters simply disposed of the aging Mini before sweeping away its long-term protective home. Who knows? I've been fortunate enough over the years to stumble across quite a few old cars in a similar manner to this, and if you haven't yet seen the video I did in more recent times for the channel describing the discovery of a magnificent 1937 Talbot 3 litre in a domestic garage, home to it since the long hot summer of 1976, please go and take a look at that when you're finished here. Alas, therefore, this rambling Mini story doesn't have an ending as such, at least not yet. What became of it? Is it still out there somewhere? Perhaps a treasured possession of a classic Mini enthusiast? I hope so. On several occasions over the years I've posted details of an old car onto the main old classic car site, and sometimes even years later people have got in touch with news about the car in question. So I hope that's what happens with this Mini. Do you know where it is now or what happened to it? If so, please either drop a note into the comments section of this video or fire over an email via the Old Classic Car website. I'd love to know the answer to this one. If you're new to the channel and enjoyed this tale of four-wheel discovery, please give it a like and consider subscribing. If you'd like me to do more deep dives on cars I've found over the years, also let me know via the comments below, please. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please check out the rest of the channel for more content relating to classic cars, vans, lorries and so on, and there'll be many more videos along very soon. So bye for now.